Hey y'all, it's Everett Maxine. I know it's been a while since you heard my voice, and I hope you have been well. In 2019, when I began the podcast, it was an opportunity to share memories, testimonies of what God had done in my life, and also the opportunity to honor my mother, who was found deceased June 19th of 2018. God had put it upon my heart that it was time to be vulnerable about my life and to share with others, to encourage them that they were not alone. All of this in the middle of my own grief journey. My grandmother, who had passed May 28th of 2018, finding my mom, like I said, on June 19th of 2018, and the demise of my divorce that was finalized November 5th of 2018. Life was really lifing, but the goodness of God held me up with His strength. And you listened, you shared, you were encouraged, you were moved. A year after I began the podcast, a lady found me by the name of Andrea Powell through the Audrey app. That was an app then that also shared podcasts. And she asked me to be a guest on her radio show, her live radio show. I was honored and privileged at the opportunity. And I feel like as I relaunch the podcast, it's a need to share that interview. Because as I go from the season where I shared all of my hurt to encourage you with hope, it's necessary for me to share those gems and those jewels that I shared then 4 years ago. So listen in to the interview, and I'll check back in with you when it's done. Be blessed.
This morning we have Miss Everett Maxine, and before I allow her to speak, I want to read just a snippet of her bio so I can give y'all a little background about Miss Maxine. July 19, her podcast was birthed, titled The Absence of Her. Ooh la la, The Absence of Her. In memory of her mother, in which she shares her truth from childhood to adulthood about being sexually abused, living with the spirit of rejection, grief, and issues facing women daily. After being a client of therapy for the last 3 years, she promotes the need for being mentally healthy. Her belief is that she has not survived for herself, but for the purpose to help others through her testimonies and truths. The Absence of Her can be found all over. She's on Apple Podcasts, Speaker, Audrey, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and so on. Her courageous voice has been heard all across the United States and even a few countries abroad. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Miss Everett Maxine. Yes, so I found her on one of the many outlets in which her podcast is viewable or listening to. And there was this one episode I came across in particular where she started off with a poem, and I was like, okay, lady, okay. And I want to give y'all the opportunity to hear what I heard that initially drew me in, because that's when I started listening to some of the other material that she had available, and I was like, okay, this lady has some depth. And I want to invite her so that my listeners can hear what I hear. So, Miss Maxine, if you wouldn't mind sharing the piece that you wrote entitled Tomorrow.
Sure. I wish you could see tomorrow and have a better view of how to release that anger inside of you. Whether it's over a lover, money, or a lost fight, taking the life of another just isn't right. I wish you could see tomorrow and see the tears in those children's face, because that murdered parent can never be replaced. A bullet isn't a solution. The real problem will still exist. Why can't you just have words or handle it with your fist? I wish you could see tomorrow and put your pride to the side. Had you thought about tomorrow, maybe no one would have died. Thou shalt not kill is a commandment that you must have missed. But I understand we live in a world that lives as if God's word does not exist. I wish you could see tomorrow and understand that gun violence is not the only way. Because you left family members mourning, until their dying day. A bullet doesn't win a battle. It only starts a war. Because taking the life of another is going too far. You may feel superior taking one life, when in reality, you have lost two. Because your life is gone also when the authorities catch you. I wish you could see tomorrow and envision that prison cell. Because trapped in your thoughts behind bars is your own personal hell.
Tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, usually I start off with the same two questions, and I'm going to hit you with those two questions. But before I go, I would like to know, what was your frame of mind? What was your motivation? What was your inspiration behind penning that seemingly very personal piece of art?
This year, when I wrote it, we actually had 3 murders in my hometown of Bay City. And it's a very small population. It's about 20,000 people. And it was very personal to me because most of the people that had been murdered were somebody that I knew or somebody else knew, and they were all under the age of 50.
Oh, wow.
And so I wrote that, dedicating that piece and that podcast, Nobody Wins, was the title of the podcast, about gun violence and honoring basically their families and letting people know, like, take the time to think. I know people get angry, they're quick to pull out a gun, but think about taking a life. Like, you can't reverse that. That's irreversible.
Right. Well, once again, thank you, because, like, listening to it on your podcast, I'm like, man, I know there has to be a story behind this one, because she's talking about, like that came from a very personal place. So thank you for your transparency and vulnerability in that aspect. So I would like to start off with the questions that I ask each and every one of my guests. Number 1, Miss Everett, if you had the undivided attention of an audience of your choosing, who would be the audience, and what would you tell them?
My audience would most definitely be young women, preferably around the ages of 18 to 25, and they've gone through some type of abuse. And I would tell them, don't build on brokenness. Okay. Like, dig at that cracked foundation, uproot those feelings of worthlessness, because you felt you had a child out of wedlock, feelings of neglect because your parents chose addiction over you. Any kind of negative feeling, uproot that before you start your career, your education. Get all that junk out of the way. Because, Romans 12 talks about renewing the mind. And to renew means to resume after interruption in progress. So whatever happened to you then was a temporary moment, and don't allow it to define your future.
You said, I need you to rewind. You said renew means to what?
Means to resume after interruption in progress.
Resume after interruption in process. I like that. I am quick to go to a dictionary real quick and give specific meanings for real, because I'm like, I feel like if more people knew what this meant, they would understand. But I like that. I can tell already that you have a heart for women who have been in some kind of survival mode. And I say that because to have survived and gone through abuse, you have to be a survivor. You have to, because everyone doesn't, unfortunately, and we know this. So women 18 through 25, and that's young. I mean, you're at the precipice of coming out of a state of childhood and entering into that, adulthood. And without a proper foundation, it can be a really scary place. And especially if you've been coming out of abuse and some of the other things that you mentioned that you wanted to speak to. And I'm quite certain that you use your platform for that, which is why I'm really excited to, if I can in any way, shape, or form, bring the absence of her to a spotlight and put her on a bigger platform, because I feel like you are you're saying some things that people need to hear, and not just women and young women. Like the fellas need to hear this too.
Oh, absolutely.
I hope y'all out here listening. But yeah, it's awesome. Okay, so number 2. If you had the opportunity to speak to a younger version of yourself, let's say 5 or 6-year-old little Miss Everett, what do you think that she would need to hear?
You're loved and you're beautiful. Enjoy being a child the best you can. Your life is worth something. It has purpose. And your challenges you face is just because the enemy doesn't want you to survive and to exist.
That's heavy for a 5-year-old, you said.
I had a heavy childhood.
Yeah. Because you said the enemy doesn't want you to exist. So you feel as though at 5 and 6-year-old, like, you knew that he was trying to take you out?
From very early on, I felt very neglected. I felt very unwanted. And so that spirit of rejection sat in me for up until adulthood.
Wow. Okay. Well, every time I ask this question, I hear something new, but the sentiment remains the same. Like, stay in there, kiddo. Like, better days are coming. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Okay, you are loved. You are beautiful. Be a kid. Enjoy being a kid. I flipped the script a few months ago, and I had kids come on, and I asked them questions, but like opposite of the first two. And one of the kids, she said that, I want the adults to know that kids go through hard stuff too. And I was like, I felt that in my shondo, because I think a lot of times we think, oh, you're a kid, go sit in the corner. Children are to be seen and not heard, but like legit kids can have issues. And from what you're telling me, you feel like you said you had a really heavy childhood.
Right.
Yeah, having someone to say, hey, I'm going through, I bet would have been, wow, a major turning point. So, my listeners, they heard a snippet about your podcast and how it was birthed. But I would very much like to give you some room. I want to allow you to give us some insight into this journey. Like, what was that one defining moment when you knew, okay, this is going to be bigger than I thought it was?
Well, there was a couple of things that transpired as you started listening to my podcast. And in 2018, it was just full of loss for me. My grandma passed, my mom passed not even a month later, and my divorce was final the same year. And like everybody saw me as strong, and many were surprised that I was even divorcing my former husband. And as I looked over my life those couple of months, I was like, there are people that look up to me, my lifestyle, they think I'm happy, and I feel like I'm painting this false picture for them. Because everybody doesn't follow God, but they sometimes look at us believers and try to learn from us. So in the spring of 2019, I was praying about something where I could honor my mom and share my truth. And podcast came in my spirit, but I hesitated because I was worried about, what will people think when I come out here with all these hard-hitting truths. And so it was in April that I was invited to speak at Texas Southern University's Marundi Gray Affair because I was a scholarship recipient. And there were only 3 of us. I was the only female standing center stage in a room with Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, best-selling author Rashonda Tate Billingsley, SWV was there, and all these dignitaries. And before them, I shared about the loss of my mother and how she was one of the people that I relied on for financial help and how I thanked them for their scholarship. And in that moment, as I stood there center stage, God was showing me He could open doors for me, that if I submitted my life to Him, He could use me for His purpose, and that I could really reach people and make a difference in their lives. So I said, I absolutely have to follow through with doing this podcast.
Okay, and that was in April, you said?
Yeah, April of 2019.
So when did, your first one launch?
July 7th of 2019.
And she wouldn't play no game. She was like, okay, you said podcast guy, I got you. Well, that's what's up. I mean, I love how he will use a situation. Like, he wasn't joking. When he said all things work together for our good, he meant that thing.